The photograph you're looking at captured the exact moment Frank Sinatra destroyed his marriage in front of 50 witnesses. Look closely. Frank is storming across a movie set, divorce papers in his hand, face twisted with rage. In the background, a young blonde woman, his wife Mia Farrow, stands frozen in shock, hands covering her mouth. She's 22 years old, he's 52. They've been married for exactly 16 months, and their marriage is ending right now, in this moment, in the most public and humiliating way possible. Frank is throwing divorce papers at Mia's feet, on a film set, in front of the director, the crew, the cameras. Why? Because Mia Farrow refused to choose, refused to give up her career for him, refused to be the obedient wife Frank demanded. And Frank Sinatra, the man who controlled everything in his world, couldn't control her, so he destroyed what they had, in 90 seconds, in front of everyone. This is the story of the most shocking age gap marriage in Hollywood history, a 50-year-old legend and a 19-year-old actress, a man who wanted a traditional wife and a woman who wanted to be a star, a love story that started as a fairy tale and ended as a public execution. This is how Frank Sinatra lost the one woman who could have saved him from himself. To understand why Frank is throwing divorce papers at his wife's feet, you need to understand how they met. July 1964, a movie set in Los Angeles. Frank was 48 years old, divorced from Ava Gardner for over a decade, the most powerful entertainer in the world, the chairman of the board, a man who could have any woman he wanted, and he'd had many. After Ava, Frank had dated actresses, models, socialites, beautiful women who understood the game, who knew that dating Frank Sinatra meant living in his shadow, on his schedule, by his rules. Mia Farrow was 19 years old, unknown, the daughter of actress Maureen O'Sullivan and director John Farrow. She'd just landed her first major role on the TV show Peyton Place. They met on the set of Peyton Place. Frank was visiting the 20th Century Fox lot to see a friend. He was walking across the studio backlot when he heard music. Someone was playing a sitar between takes. Curious, Frank followed the sound, and there was Mia Farrow, sitting cross-legged on the ground in her costume, eyes closed, playing a sitar badly, but enthusiastically. Frank stood there watching her for a full minute before she opened her eyes and saw him. "Oh," she said, jumping up, nearly dropping the instrument. You're Frank Sinatra, and you're the girl who plays the sitar," Frank said, smiling. "Not very well," Mia admitted, blushing. "I liked it," Frank said. "It's different." And that was the word that would define Mia for Frank. Different. Mia was nothing like the women Frank usually dated. She wasn't a bombshell, wasn't glamorous. She was thin, almost skeletal. She had a pixie haircut when long hair was in fashion, wore no makeup in an era of heavy cosmetics, looked more like a teenage boy than a Hollywood starlet. She talked about Eastern philosophy and meditation. She was a vegetarian, something Frank had never even heard of. She didn't drink alcohol or smoke cigarettes. Everything about her was the opposite of Frank's world, and Frank was mesmerized. "Who is that?" he asked a producer after Mia had gone back to work. "That's Mia Farrow, Maureen O'Sullivan's daughter. She's about 19, I think. Sweet kid, little weird but talented." Frank was old enough to be her father. He had a daughter, Nancy Jr., who was only 7 years younger than Mia. His son, Frank Jr., was only 4 years younger, but Frank didn't care about any of that. The next day, he sent flowers to the set, 24 white roses with a card, to the girl with the sitar. Dinner. Frank sent a car for her, a black Cadillac, with a driver in a suit. Mia had never been in a car like that before. They went to an Italian restaurant Frank owned in Beverly Hills. When Mia arrived, she realized the entire restaurant had been cleared, just the two of them, and a pianist playing softly in the corner. "I hope you don't mind," Frank said. "I thought it would be nice to talk without interruptions." Mia was overwhelmed. This was the most romantic thing that had ever happened to her. Frank was the perfect gentleman that night. He pulled out her chair, ordered for both of them in perfect Italian, asked about her dreams, her family, her fears. "What do you want from your life?" Frank asked. "I want to be a great actress," Mia said. "I want to do meaningful work, films that matter. I want people to take me seriously." "They will," Frank said with complete confidence. "You have something, I can see it, a quality that can't be taught." Mia felt seen in a way she'd never experienced before. "What about you?" Mia asked. "What do you want?" Frank thought for a moment. "At my age, I want to find peace. I've spent my whole life chasing success. Now I want connection, something real." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I think you might be real, Mia Farrow." By the end of that night, Mia was completely enchanted. Frank was everything she wasn't. Confident where she was insecure, powerful where she felt powerless, certain where she was lost. Within 2 weeks they were sleeping together. Within 2 months, Frank was calling Mia his girlfriend, and Hollywood was horrified. The age gap was shocking even by Hollywood standards, where older men routinely dated younger women. The press had a field day. "Sinatra robs the cradle," screamed one tabloid. "Frank's child bride," announced another. "Mia, younger than Frank's daughter," was the headline that hurt the most. Photos of them together looked bizarre. Frank in his expensive suits looking like a successful middle-aged man, Mia in her hippie clothes looking like his daughter dressed for a costume party. But Frank didn't care about the headlines. He was genuinely infatuated in a way he hadn't been since Ava Gardner. Mia was different from anyone he'd known. She wasn't impressed by his fame. She'd grown up around Hollywood royalty and knew it was all smoke and mirrors. She didn't want his money. She lived simply, almost ascetically. She was intellectual in ways that surprised him. She read philosophy, practiced meditation, talked about consciousness and spirituality. "What's reincarnation?" Frank asked her one night. "The belief that our souls return in different forms," Mia explained. "That we live multiple lives, learning lessons until we achieve enlightenment." "Do you believe that?" Frank asked. "I don't know," Mia said, "but I like the idea that we get more than one chance." These conversations fascinated Frank. His world was Vegas, mob guys, whiskey and cigarettes. Hers was incense, yoga and vegetarian food. She made Frank feel young again, made him want to be better. Frank showered her with gifts, expensive jewelry that Mia would accept politely and then never wear. A brand new Mercedes that sat in her driveway because she preferred her beat-up Volkswagen. Trips to Europe where Frank wanted to go to five-star hotels and Mia wanted to backpack and stay in hostels. Their friends watched with a mixture of amusement and concern. Dean Martin pulled Frank aside one night. "You know this can't work, right?" "Why not?" Frank demanded. "Because she's 20 years old, Frank. She doesn't want what you want. She can't want what you want. She's still figuring out who she is." "I can help her figure it out," Frank said. "That's what I'm worried about," Dean replied. In 1966, after dating for less than 2 years, Frank proposed. Mia was 21. Frank was 50. He proposed at his Palm Springs compound. No down-on-one-knee moment. No romantic speech. Just Frank, over breakfast, saying, "We should get married." "What?" Mia looked up from her grapefruit. "Married. You and me. Let's do it." "Are you proposing to me?" "Yes," Frank said impatiently. "Is that a yes?" Mia should have said no. Every rational bone in her body was screaming to say no. But she was 21 years old, and in love with the idea of being in love with Frank Sinatra. "Yes," she said. Her mother, Maureen O'Sullivan, was devastated when she heard the news. "He's older than I am," Maureen said, pacing her living room. "Mia, this is insane. You're a child. He's going to control you. He's going to destroy your career before it even starts." "He loves me," Mia protested. "He loves the idea of you," Maureen corrected. "He loves having a young, beautiful, adoring wife. But what happens when you're not young anymore? What happens when you disagree with him? What happens when you want to make your own decisions?" "He's not like that," Mia insisted. "Every powerful man is like that," Maureen said. "Trust me, I've been in this business my whole life." But Mia didn't listen, because 21-year-olds rarely listen to their mothers about matters of the heart. On July 19, 1966, Frank and Mia got married in Las Vegas at the Sands Hotel. The ceremony lasted 4 minutes. Frank's attorney, Mickey Rudin, stood as best man. There were maybe 8 people in attendance. No family from either side. No real friends. No celebration. Mia wore a simple white suit she'd bought off the rack at a department store. Frank wore one of his standard dark suits. The justice of the peace read the vows. Frank and Mia said, "I do," and that was it. It was the strangest wedding Hollywood had ever seen. No fanfare, no press announcement beforehand, no reception, just a 50-year-old man and a 21-year-old girl making a decision that would destroy them both. From the very beginning, the marriage was a disaster. The problem started immediately. On the honeymoon, Frank wanted to go to New York, see shows, eat at the best restaurants, party with friends. Mia wanted to go somewhere quiet, maybe India, maybe to meditate. They compromised by doing what Frank wanted. In New York, Frank dragged Mia to nightclubs where she didn't drink, to restaurants where she couldn't eat half the menu because she was vegetarian, to parties full of people 3 times her age talking about things she didn't understand. "Are you having fun?" Frank would ask. "Sure," Mia would lie. But she wasn't having fun. She was miserable, and Frank could tell, which made him angry. "I'm giving you the best of everything," Frank would say. "The best restaurants, the best hotels, the best life. Why aren't you happy?" "Because this isn't what I want," Mia would say quietly. "Then what do you want?" "I don't know," Mia would admit. "But not this." The fights escalated after they returned to Los Angeles. Frank wanted a traditional wife, someone who would be there when he came home, someone who would host his parties, charm his business associates, look beautiful on his arm, and never complain. Mia wanted to be an actress, to build a career, to be taken seriously as an artist. Those two visions were fundamentally incompatible. Frank would call Mia from the road. "I'm coming home tomorrow night. Make sure you're there. I'm bringing some people for dinner." Mia would respond, "I have a script reading tomorrow night. I can't cancel." "Cancel it," Frank would say. "You're my wife. Your job is to be there when I need you. I'm also an actress. This is my career. You're my wife first." Frank would insist. Click. He'd hang up. Then he wouldn't speak to her for days. The silent treatment was Frank's weapon of choice. When Mia did something he didn't like, he would simply stop acknowledging her existence, walk past her without speaking, ignore her at dinner, act like she wasn't there. It was psychological torture, and it worked. Mia would always break first. "I'm sorry," she'd say, even when she'd done nothing wrong. "Please talk to me." Frank would eventually relent, and things would be good for a while, until the next conflict. The breaking point came in early 1960. It was based on Ira Levin's best-selling horror novel about a young woman who suspects her husband and neighbors are part of a satanic cult trying to use her baby for evil purposes. Paramount wanted Mia. Polanski wanted Mia. It was a major opportunity, a starring role in what everyone predicted would be a massive hit. Mia was thrilled when her agent called with the offer. "This could change everything for me," Mia told Frank excitedly. "This could prove I'm a serious actress." Frank's face darkened. "When does it shoot?" "4 months, starting in August." "4 months?" Frank's voice went cold. "You'll be gone for 4 months. Well, I'll be in LA, so I have concerts scheduled. Europe, Vegas. You're supposed to come with me." "Frank, this is my career. This is important." "I'm your husband," Frank said. "I'm more important than some movie." "Why can't both things be important?" Mia asked. "Because that's not how marriage works," Frank said. "When you married me, you chose me, my life, my schedule, my priorities. That's not fair. Life's not fair," Frank said. "You're not doing the film." End of discussion. But for the first time in their marriage, Mia refused to back down. "I'm doing it," she said quietly. "I'm sorry, but I'm doing it." Frank stared at her for a long moment. Then he walked out of the room without another word. Mia signed the contract for Rosemary's Baby the next day. When Frank found out from his business manager, not from Mia, he didn't speak to her for 3 days. Then he gave her an ultimatum. They were in the living room of their Bel Air home. Frank poured himself a drink, didn't offer one to Mia. "You have a choice to make," Frank said. "What choice?" Mia asked, though she knew what was coming. "The movie or me? You can't have both." "Frank, that's not reasonable." "I don't care about reasonable," Frank exploded. "I care about my wife being where she's supposed to be, with me, not on some movie set playing make-believe for 4 months. It's not make-believe. It's my job. Your job is to be my wife. Why can't I be both?" Mia was crying now. "Why do I have to choose?" "Because I'm telling you to choose," Frank said coldly. "Walk away from the film, or I walk away from this marriage." Mia looked at him through her tears. At this man she thought she loved, this man who was supposed to support her dreams, and she made her choice. "I'm doing the film," she said. Frank set down his drink very carefully. "Then we're done," he said, and he walked out. But Mia didn't believe him. She thought he was bluffing, thought he'd cool down and apologize. She was wrong. Filming Rosemary's Baby began in August 1967. From day one, Frank tried to sabotage it. He would call the set constantly, demanding to speak to Mia. When she couldn't come to the phone because she was in the middle of a scene, Frank would rage at whoever answered. "Tell my wife I called," he'd snarl. "Tell her it's important." But it was never important. It was just Frank asserting control. He showed up at the set unannounced multiple times, each time causing a disruption that cost hours of production time. Director Roman Polanski finally had to ban Frank from the set. "Your husband is creating serious problems," Polanski told Mia. "Either he stops coming here, or we're going to fall dangerously behind schedule." Mia was humiliated. She begged Frank to stop. "I'll stop when you quit the film," Frank said. "I'm not quitting." "Then I won't stop." It was psychological warfare, and Frank was winning. He also started being seen publicly with other women, beautiful women, young women, not sleeping with them or so Frank claimed, just making sure Mia saw the photos in the tabloids. Frank Sinatra having dinner with a blonde actress at Chasen's. Frank Sinatra at a nightclub with a beautiful brunette on his arm. Frank Sinatra dancing with a mystery woman at the Sands. The message was clear. If you won't be my wife, I'll find someone who will. Mia was devastated but refused to quit the film. By November 1967, the production was behind schedule. Polanski was a perfectionist. He demanded take after take, insisted on specific performances, wouldn't move on until every detail was exactly right. Frank's patience finally ran out completely. He called Mia on the evening of November 7th. "The film wraps this week, or we're done," he said. "No hello, no small talk. Frank, we're not done shooting. The schedule isn't up to me. I can't just walk away." "Yes, you can. You tell Polanski you're sick. You quit. You come home to your husband like you promised you would." "I never promised that." "You promised to be my wife," Frank shouted. "And my wife puts me first. I'm putting my career first," Mia said. "For once in my life, I'm putting myself first." Silence on the other end. Then Frank, in a voice so cold it made Mia shiver. "Then you're choosing Polanski over me. You're choosing this movie over your marriage." "I'm choosing me, Frank. I'm choosing my own life." "Fine," Frank said. "Then live it without me." Click. The line went dead. Mia tried calling back. The line was busy. She tried again an hour later. No answer. She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, November 8, 1967, she went to work at Paramount Studios, exhausted and anxious but determined to finish what she'd started. At 2:30 p.m., in the middle of a critical scene, Frank Sinatra walked onto the soundstage and ended their marriage in front of everyone. When Frank burst through the soundstage door, everything stopped. The cameras stopped rolling. The crew stopped working. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Mia was in the middle of a dramatic scene, wearing her Rosemary costume, a simple maternity dress that made her look even younger and more vulnerable than usual. She saw Frank and her face went white. "Frank, what are you doing here?" Frank didn't answer. He walked across the set toward her with purpose, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Behind him, his lawyer Mickey Rudin carried a manila envelope. Roman Polanski stepped forward, trying to intercept. "Mr. Sinatra, we're in the middle of filming. You can't be here. This is a closed set." Frank ignored him completely, didn't even glance in his direction. He walked right up to Mia, face to face, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "I gave you a choice," Frank said quietly, but in the silent studio, everyone could hear every word. "You made it." "Frank, please," Mia said, her voice shaking. "Not here. Let's talk later. Privately." "No," Frank said. "We're done talking. We've been done talking for months." "Frank, you chose this movie over your marriage," Frank interrupted. "You chose your career over your husband." "Fine. I hope it was worth it." He turned to Mickey Rudin and held out his hand. Mickey hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "Frank, maybe we should." "Give them to me," Frank commanded. Mickey handed over the envelope. Frank opened it slowly, deliberately, pulled out the divorce papers, and threw them at Mia's feet. Papers scattered across the studio floor like fallen leaves. Several crew members gasped audibly. "You're served," Frank said. Mia stood frozen, hands slowly rising to cover her mouth. Tears began streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "Frank," she started, her voice breaking. "We're done," Frank interrupted. "You chose this movie over your marriage. Fine. Enjoy your career. Hope it keeps you warm at night." He turned to leave, but Mia found her voice. "You can't do this. You can't just." Frank spun back, and the rage on his face made several people step backward. "I can do whatever I want," he said, his voice rising. "I'm Frank Sinatra. You're nobody. You were nobody when I met you, playing a sitar on a TV set. And you'll be nobody when I'm gone. This movie, it'll flop, and you'll spend the rest of your life regretting what you gave up." The cruelty in his voice was shocking. Several crew members later said they'd never heard anyone speak to another human being with such venom. Polanski tried to intervene again. "Mr. Sinatra, you need to leave. Now. You're upsetting everyone." Frank turned on him, pointing an accusatory finger. This is your fault. You convinced her to put this stupid movie ahead of her marriage. You destroyed my marriage for your vanity project." "I didn't convince her of anything," Polanski said calmly, though his face was pale. "She's an artist. Artists work. That's what we do. She's my wife," Frank exploded. "Or she was. And wives don't abandon their husbands for 4 months to play dress-up in your haunted house movie." "Frank, stop," Mia sobbed. "Please, just stop." Frank looked at her one more time, and for just a second, something flickered across his face. Regret, doubt, love, but then it was gone, replaced by cold anger. "Good luck with your life, kid," he said. "You're going to need it." And he walked out. The soundstage door slammed shut with a bang that echoed like a gunshot. Total silence. 50 people standing frozen, not knowing what to do or where to look. Then Mia's legs gave out. She dropped to her knees on the floor, surrounded by divorce papers, and started sobbing. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. Polanski knelt beside her immediately. "Mia, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." But Mia couldn't respond. She was crying too hard, gasping for breath between sobs. One of the actresses playing a neighbor, a woman named Victoria Vetri, came over with a box of tissues. The cinematographer turned away, unable to watch. Several crew members had tears in their own eyes. Production shut down for the day. One of the camera assistants later gave an interview to a reporter. "I've worked in Hollywood for 30 years. I've seen divorces, affairs, fights, everything. But I've never seen anything as cruel as what Frank Sinatra did to that girl that day. He destroyed her in front of 50 people, and she was just a kid. It was like watching a public execution. I'll never forget the look on her face." The divorce was finalized on August 16, 19. He didn't fight over money or property, didn't ask for anything back. He just wanted it over. The settlement gave Mia almost nothing. She didn't ask for much. She kept some jewelry Frank had given her, kept the Mercedes he'd bought her, but she gave most of it away to friends. "I don't want anything that reminds me of that time," she told a friend. Rosemary's Baby was released on June 12. It was a massive critical and commercial success, earning over $33 million against a $3.2 million budget. Huge numbers for 1968. Mia's performance was praised universally. Critics called her haunting, vulnerable, perfect. She was nominated for a Golden Globe. The film became a cultural phenomenon. It made Mia Farrow a star, but it cost her her marriage. For years afterward, interviewers asked Mia the same question: was it worth it? Her answer was always the same: "I had to do it. If I hadn't stood up for myself that one time, I would have lost myself completely." And what kind of life is that? Frank, on the other hand, rarely spoke about Mia publicly after the divorce. In interviews, when reporters brought her up, he'd say simply, "Mia and I wanted different things. It didn't work out. That's all there is to say." But privately, friends said he was devastated. Not immediately. Immediately, he was still angry. But as time passed, and his anger cooled, the regret set in. He loved her, Dean Martin said in an interview years later. Really loved her, but he loved her like a possession, not like a partner. He wanted to own her, control her, shape her into his ideal woman, and when she wouldn't let him do that, when she insisted on being her own person, he didn't know what to do except destroy it. That's Frank's tragedy. He couldn't love without controlling. Look at the photograph one more time. Frank Sinatra, 52 years old, throwing divorce papers at his 22-year-old wife's feet, in front of 50 witnesses, on a film set, at the peak of her vulnerability. This wasn't just a divorce, this was a public humiliation designed to punish Mia for choosing herself. Frank thought he could control Mia, thought he could force her to choose between him and her career. He thought she'd choose him. She didn't, and Frank's response wasn't just to divorce her quietly, it was to humiliate her, to show her, and everyone watching, what happens when you defy Frank Sinatra. But it backfired completely, because the moment Mia stood there, surrounded by divorce papers, refusing to quit the film even after that devastating public humiliation, she won. Rosemary's Baby became a classic. Mia's career lasted decades. She worked with Woody Allen for years, raised children, became a humanitarian, and built a life of meaning. And Frank remarried in 1976 to Barbara Marx, a woman who did what Mia wouldn't. Barbara gave up everything to be Mrs. Sinatra, lived in his world, followed his rules, never challenged him. They stayed married until Frank died in 1998, but friends said he was never truly happy, never truly satisfied, because Mia Farrow was the one who got away, not because she left, but because she refused to be owned. And that's the real lesson in this photograph. You can be the most powerful man in the world, the chairman of the board, a legend, but if you try to control someone instead of loving them for who they are, you'll lose them, and you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what could have been. Frank Sinatra learned that lesson on November 8, 1967, the hard way, in front of 50 witnesses, and he carried that regret for the next 31 years, until the day he died. If this story just changed everything you thought you knew about Frank Sinatra and Mia Farrow, you need to subscribe right now, because next week we're uncovering the truth about Frank's darkest moment, the night he lost his voice on stage, and his career nearly ended forever, the panic attack that the media covered up, the vocal hemorrhage that doctors said would be permanent, the moment Frank Sinatra thought his life was over. This channel reveals the stories Hollywood buried, the moments of weakness behind the legends, the truth about the icons who shaped American culture and paid a terrible price for it. Subscribe to Frank Sinatra, The Untold Legacy, and turn on notifications. Hit that like button if this story gave you a new perspective on Frank and Mia, and comment below. Was Frank right to demand Mia choose, or was Mia right to choose her career? Because the answer tells you everything about love, power, and control. Next week's episode will destroy you. See you then.